different. I'm going to be talking about how to interpret studies, how to interpret things that you might hear. That this is sort of like on the other end. You've already found it. I'll talk a little bit about what good research looks like, and that might help you guide what you find. But you should sort of think of these lectures as maybe like two sides to, I think there's a later lecture about how to cut cards. That'll go a little bit more in detail about like what your actual, like how to actually cut them into cards. But I'm going to be talking about like what makes evidence convincing. So a big feature of debate are link chains. When you debate, you are going to try to say, this is my thesis. I think, for example, a potential PF topic is that the United States should pass Medicare for all. You are going to say, we should because of this like overarching reason, or we shouldn't because of this overarching reason. And under that, I'm going to call that your thesis. Under that reason, you're going to have several claims. And each of those claims needs to be backed up by a warrant. I think this is kind of the fundamental ethos of debate, that every claim needs a warrant. I think that's, personally, I think one of the most informative things that debaters take out of this experience. After competing in high school, you go out into your future life. One of the things that will like most permanently change about the way you think is that you will always think about warrants. And the foundation of so many of these warrants is evidence, and specifically empirical evidence, some relationship about the world that you claim proves the thing you claim. There's a lot of complexity about how these claims might be related. People talk about link chains because often like one claim leads to the next. Like I might say, global warming causes the polar ice caps to melt. The polar ice caps melting causes the level of the ocean to rise. The level of the ocean rising means that Manhattan, like a large percentage of Manhattan is underwater. A large percentage of Manhattan underwater costs us a lot of money. So like global warming is bad for the economy. That might be an example of a link chain that each of those claims you would ideally support with some kind of empirical evidence. And thus, so many arguments about debates are arguments about how like something causes something else. However, the burden of proof about whether X causes Y lies on the person making this argument. And oftentimes you can win the debate if you can prove that you more convincingly prove like how X causes Y. And I'll give you an example from my own debate experience. So this was the topic that I debated as a senior at the California State Tournament. It was a LD topic. The United States ought to promote democracy in the Middle East. And from my own affirmative case, I would have this kind of overarching thesis that democracy reduces violence. And I have some reasons why I think that's true. I claim that it reduces violence by the state, and I claim that it reduces terrorism. Now, why do I think that's true? That's the warrant. Well, for reducing state violence, I might say, well, democracies are accountable. And for reducing terrorism, I might say, and democracies have nonviolent channels, and that way, if you have a big complaint, you would do something nonviolent rather than something violent, which would be terrorism in this instance. That's all well and good, but whether or not I'm actually right about that depends on being able to prove it. And to prove it, you want empirical evidence. So my empirical evidence for why democracy reduces state violence: democracy is associated with less violent state repression. That means I looked at a bunch of countries. I found some that are democracies. I found some that aren't democracies. I looked at which of them had more state violence, and I found that democracies had less state violence than the non-democracies. That kind of works with the theory that I presented you. And for terrorism, it's kind of the same thing. As there has been more democracy, there has been less terrorism ever since the fall of communist autocracy in the 90s. That's great. That's like a beautiful AC, you might think. But the negation can get up there and argue the exact opposite, which is that democracy would increase violence. And they could even make the exact opposite of the claims I make for why. I said that the AF says democracy reduces state violence. The negation would say that it increases state violence. The AF says that it reduces terrorism. The neg says that it increases terrorism. And they have their own warrants. elections might lead to extremist takeovers, which lead to more state violence. Or in sectarian conflicts, or in countries with a lot of like bitterly divided ethnic groups, one of them will be a minority and it will have to resort to violence if the state does everything by majority rule. And in turn, I can have some empirical evidence. I can say, well, in Egypt and Palestine, there were elections, extremists won those elections, that will lead to more state violence or has led to more state violence. I could say, for evidence about terrorism, that the Iraq invasion failed to account for ethnic divisions, and that in turn spurred terrorism. I'm taking each of these as little like synopses from cards that I read in these actual debates. And so you can see that like, if this was the round in front of you, we're making exactly contradictory claims. Who's right is a question of whose evidence is better. And so many debates come down to this, that I think one of the most important skills, not only to win debates, but then also as you go about your life. Yes, there are some kind of technical aspects of debate that will color the way you think, but learning how to interpret evidence will just directly help you, right? It's like, I think the analogy I would make is, you know, if you play basketball in high school, you'll learn some basketball specific skills like shooting the ball. You'll learn to flow if you debate in high school, which I very much hope you do. But basketball will make you fit kind of athletically, and debate will make you fit intellectually to handle evidence debates, if that is what you emphasize. So how do we prove causality? It's very, very difficult. I think in debate, we like to think it's very easy. There's a whole field, it's called causal inference. It's kind of like a branch of statistics. And that is an academic field and advances methods that are widely used in economics and poli-sci and epidemiology. I think fundamentally, what makes it hard is that it's sort of impossible. You want to prove what would happen if it or didn't do something that didn't happen, or that hasn't happened yet. That's kind of like why at a big level you should be like hesitant of people who think they can prove that X caused Y, because you don't know what happened if X didn't happen, or if X hasn't happened, you won't know what will happen if it happens. Our best way to get around this is through a randomized control trial. That's where you have like an experiment where there's like one arm of the experiment that gets the thing you're studying. Let's say that's like hydroxychloroquine to address, to treat COVID-19. And then there's another arm that doesn't get that thing, and you randomly decided who got it and who didn't get it. Then you can convincingly say, well, since I randomly chose and these two groups are exactly the same, the only difference in their outcome has to be attributed to the difference in the treatment. And so we can say X caused Y. Unfortunately, we like really can't do this in almost any social science setting. I mean, in medicine, this is like something that is kind of possible, but like you will not convince people to like do a randomized control trial in terms of how they run their economy. You won't convince people to do a randomized control trial in terms of how they run their schools or national security. Like you won't convince people like, hey, let's flip a coin. If it's heads, you invade the country. If it's tails, you don't invade the country. That way we can study the effect of invasion. Like it just won't happen, right? So how can we convincingly prove that something is causal? Well, I think first, for a debate and for just general life, like you should have a strong theoretical reason why you think this effect would hold. And that is why I firmly believe good warrants always have two parts: theory, like a theoretical reason, and then the evidence that backs it up. Because so many times you will see people who say like X causes Y, and then just give you an empirical piece of evidence that like could support their claim, but there isn't like a theoretical reason to believe that it's true. And you will often find that that's spurious. I'm going to show you some examples later of some like things that are highly correlated, but you would really be really hard pressed to think why they would be related. I think it's a lot of fun. The other thing you should really have for good causal evidence is what we in causal inference like to call like a natural experiment. This really just means like, because of some quirk of the world, we ended up with something that's similar to randomization. And I don't want to get too much into that. There are a lot of different techniques. They will all require strong assumptions. And so oftentimes you will find academic papers that claim to find something, and you can dig more into what they're doing and find that their assumptions are kind of untenable. I think, you know, for me, when I was in debate, I sort of saw like, oh, well, this is like a study by somebody at Stanford, so it's kind of unassailable. I think you will find once you get to kind of more academic settings that like most of what even academics churn out like can still be attacked by attacking these assumptions, because they will have to make some strong assumptions. But I'm getting ahead of myself in terms of attacking. I will say, as a general fact, kind of the more academic your source, the more likely the empirical technique is good. So if the source is published in a good journal in their field, it probably passed some like heavy criticism. If the source is like someone's opinion or a blog that nobody had to revise, it's a lot less likely to kind of meet that standard of evidence. And you'll see as well, like the way people describe their techniques, sometimes it's like, this is a correlation, or like, I have like a 2x2 like box chart, right? Where it's like, I look at the columns and averages and stuff, whereas like then there are techniques that are more advanced. Not always better, because sometimes more advanced can just like, you're still at the end of the day hiding behind assumptions, but that's kind of what I want you to keep in mind. I think the best way to think is think about randomization as the gold standard. If somebody is claiming, hey, I proved X caused Y, they should be getting as close as possible in the real world to showing some random variation in X. There are a lot of times where like lawmakers like kind of arbitrary cutoff points, or like to or assign things kind of arbitrarily. Like there's a lot of instances where the X might be randomly assigned, or at least like quasi-randomly assigned. But that's the gold standard that you should keep in mind. And so you should think in converse, any time that you see something where the assignment to the thing you're interested in, the X that you're claiming causes Y, anytime you see that and the X isn't random, that's a red flag. And that should lead you to think, okay, what could be wrong about what they're doing? So that's what I'm really going to talk to you mostly about, is how to attack causality, because honestly, it's a little bit easier. You've probably heard the term like correlation is not causation or doesn't equal causation. It's true, but it's not like the best refutation in itself. Like, for one, if you don't like give a good reason why it's probably not causal, like the judge is probably going to side with like the person who has like, here's like my weak theoretical argument for why it's causal, and you just get up there and say, hey, well, you didn't clearly prove that it's causal. Like they're probably going to give the benefit of the doubt to the evidence if you don't show why it's biased. The other thing I'll say is that oftentimes like correlations do like detect real causations. Like the studies that showed that like smoking leads to lung cancers and stuff were observational studies. Like it's not like they got people to randomly decide to smoke or not. It was just that the effect was so big, it was kind of impossible to argue it was caused by something else. So as I said before, when you encounter evidence where the X is not randomly assigned, it should be a red flag for two reasons. You should think about two kind of big problems about what might be happening. The first is reverse causality, where like you claim X causes Y, but actually Y caused X. So for an example I'll give you from that democracy in the Middle East topic is, I say democracies are more peaceful, and I give you evidence that says like, democracies have less violence, ergo democracy causes peace. It's possible that it's the other way around. Peace actually causes democracy. And just saying those democracies have less violence doesn't prove that it was democracy that caused less violence. It could have been the other way around. And that's like an equally plausible thing. That's like, when people are secure, they can hold democratic elections, but like when there is a lot of violence, you need like a strong government that like doesn't have to whatever, like you can make an argument along those lines as well. The other thing I'll have you think about is what we call omitted variable bias. So like I claim X causes Y, but actually there was another thing that like I didn't consider that caused both of those things. So the classic example you'll find here is like ice cream sales are really highly correlated with swimming pool deaths. And like you could concoct some weird reason where like people like eat ice cream and then they like can't swim anymore or something like that. But like the real truth is like what's happening is it's a sunny day, more people eat ice cream, also more people are in the swimming pool, and whenever there are people in the swimming pool, like inevitably there are drownings. It's not that like one caused the other. There's like no causal relationship here. They're just both caused by some other thing. And that happens all the time. Now, I want to make a point here, which is like, just because evidence is bad doesn't mean that the argument isn't true. So like, we're going to go through a drill in a bit where we're going to talk about like, why might this argument be bad or why might this evidence be bad? But like, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong. Ideally, you should have your own counter evidence that you claim is better. But kind of one way or another in debate, the burden of proof falls on the person who makes the claim. And so if you can prove that they didn't prove what they said they did or what they claimed, then in debate, that's sort of enough. So here are some fun examples of things that are not causal at all, but they are correlated like very strongly in many instances. Like some of these you might come up with like a crazy reason why they happened. Like you might think somebody eats a lot of cheese and then they're like so lethargic that they can't get out of bed, and so they got strangled by their bed sheets. Like it's probably implausible that that's really what's going on. Like I challenge anybody in the chat to tell me why the Age of Myths America like affects murders by steam, hot vapors, or hot objects. Like these are just correlated. There is no causal relationship here. In debate, you will not encounter things that are this obviously dumb, but I just want to like when we say correlation does not equal causation, like we really mean it. Anyway, open challenge in the chat. Tell me why these are causal. I would be very entertained. And I'll put these slides up if you want to do it later. So I want to go through some examples before we go to the drill. So this is an example that like seems very reasonable, like way more reasonable than the examples I just gave you about like the spelling bee predicting like venomous spider killings. Like here, there's like a pretty reasonable claim. Like the more you walk, the less likely you are to die. And I'll note that this is like this is like published in a good medical journal. This is published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And they are very careful. Like they don't use causal language. They just say there was an association, like greater number of daily steps was significantly associated with lower all-cause mortality. At the same time, like you would read this and you would probably think that it's causal. Problem is like, there's a big omitted variable here, which is like, if you're healthy enough to walk, you're probably a little less, like you're probably not, the study population is like elderly people, right? And like the elderly people who are healthy enough to be able to walk have less of other health problems. So it's not necessarily that like walking let them live longer. It was that the fact that they were healthier let them live longer, and it let them walk more. So I think this is a good example of why like you should always be thinking a little bit more critically about evidence that you read. Not to say that any of you would have read this and immediately jumped to the conclusion that like walking will save your life and stuff. Like you can outwalk the Grim Reaper or something. But like if you are not deceived by this stuff, like you're smarter than most reporters, because you will find interpretations of studies like this. The original study says like, hey, there's an association between how many eggs you eat and like how likely you are to die. Okay, cool. But then CNN, Susan Scudi publishes an article that says like, more eggs increase your risk of heart disease and early death. Like that is a causal interpretation. that increase right there makes the jump from causal language to causal language. And so now, even if I don't cite the original study, I could card like Scooty 2019 says like eggs will kill you. And I could read that in a debate case that's about like, you know, if your parley topic is ever like the United States should ban eggs, like you come out and you card Scooty, and suddenly like this observational study has become a causal study, right? Okay, problem, the original study hides in the appendix that like once you control for the rest of somebody's diet, the effect disappears. So like here, the problem isn't that like people, like, it's not that eggs kill you, it's just like the people who eat a lot of eggs also eat a lot of other unhealthy things. And so like once you control for that, there's no like direct effect of eggs. I see that as like a pretty big problem. Like you definitely cannot, understanding that, make the claim like the more eggs you eat, the more likely you are to die. But like, you know, if you don't believe me, you can like tomorrow binge on eggs, like tell me how many it takes. But so these are like, and I just want to give this example of like both of these studies published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Like they're not the sort of thing that you wouldn't encounter in debates. You might like, I just want to make that very clear that like some good academic sources will be used to support like some pretty bad arguments. And so if you just like look a little deeper, think a little bit more critically than your opponent does, you can win a lot of debates. I'll go give one more example before we get to the drill. This is like a really big thing that you might talk about in this year's policy debate topic, which is about the relationship between policing and, or I guess the policy debate topic is like, should we have more policing? Today's like conversation definitely talks a lot about policing. And like, this is a really complicated topic. But in debate, you will see some pretty simple answers. And so, you know, I cut this like very simple card. You might encounter this card, right? Somebody says, reducing the number of police officers reduces violent crimes. So these two people write that the data shows the number of police officers has declined over the past 5 decades. At the same time, violent crime has also dropped. Ergo, reducing the number of police officers reduces violent crime. Now, like this is just a generally true pattern. Like localities, states, whatever, with more police officers, more police presence, like they also have more crime. But is this actually proof that police officers cause crime? I would contend that it is not. This is a case of the reverse causality, or what I'm calling here simultaneity bias. Like places that have more crime hire more police officers. There's also the problem that policing affects the measurement of crime. So the more police officers you have, the more crimes you catch, and thus like make it to your crime statistics potentially. So like this pattern alone doesn't help. I'll give you another one that I've seen. I've seen people discussing now that there are countries that have been hard hit by coronavirus, where masks are more common than places that are less hard hit. That isn't evidence that like the more we wear masks, the more coronavirus we have. In fact, it's the exact opposite, like almost certainly. In fact, certainly there's better studies that show masks are effective. But if you just like looked very simplistically, you might not account for the fact that like when there's more coronavirus, you're more likely to wear a mask. And so you would reach the exact opposite conclusion. I'll give you like, if like, for example, like if I said like umbrellas cause rain, you would all know that that's kind of ridiculous. But that's more or less what this like masks cause COVID argument would be. So anyway, I just want to tell you that like, you will encounter these things in debate. They're not that uncommon. They're not like, they are surprisingly easy traps to fall into. And to do that, Jesse and I came up with this drill. And I think because we're short on time, I'm going to say maybe we shouldn't do the like, you have to find the paper as well. But on your own time, I think it's a useful exercise to try to apply some of the things that Jesse taught you. What we're going to do is we're going to read you a card. And in fact, I have it actually set up to show a card. I think because we're short on time, maybe we should just do that. I'm going to show you a card, and I want somebody to tell me why it isn't the causal relationship I claim is wrong. So So here's your first one, which I think is a lot of fun. Somebody tell me why this isn't causal. I don't know if you're able to unmute yourselves, but if you want to just throw it in the chat. Yes, Hanny, I believe, has like nailed it. I think it is astounding that like somebody would actually write this article. Like somebody would actually not consider the fact that people on ventilators like are a different subset of patients than like the people who didn't get to ventilators. Like this is a great situation where you're like, are ventilators randomly assigned? No, they are not. And so we probably shouldn't make any inferences just on like how well do ventilators do, how well do people on ventilators do. Okay, so I'll give you a slightly harder one. Anybody have thoughts? Yeah, I think this is a good one. I think that's plausible. I think this one has maybe a little bit more room for other interpretations. I do want somebody else to answer in the chat before I move on. You're killing it, Hanny, but Hani, I don't know. I feel I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. I think that's exactly right. Yeah, so I think both identify that like there's other things going on that might make you open up. So I had a couple possibilities, like maybe democracies like to open up. Maybe countries that like Europe both emulate its democracy and like to trade with it. Absolutely, like I hadn't even done the EU might decide who it trades with based on how democratic they are, how global countries are. Like this is all really great reasons why this might not be a causal relationship. I have another one. I think this is my personal favorite. Oh no, wait. Okay. I hope nobody read the problem. So disclaimer, I love debate. I think debate will make you a better thinker. Why might this not be the best evidence?
Could I have a go at it?
Yeah, go for it.
Just because you debate doesn't mean that you're as good as in your other subjects. Like, yeah, you might be good at critical thinking, but you might not be as good as math. And so, therefore, you might not get as good of a grade as in math as you would because of debate.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's definitely fair. There are some answers in the chat as well. I think all along the lines of people who do debate are already the nerds, are already high achieving, already are more likely. I think this are more likely to already care is good. I'll give you one that I think cannot be understated. I think high schools that have debate programs and people who participate in those debate programs are generally much better resourced than people in general. So like absolutely, like we love debate. I firmly believe will make you better, will help you in future life. But I mean, there's just no, I think, denying that people who do debate are more motivated, they're richer, they're maybe more academic, maybe they're smarter, they're probably less rebellious. At least back in the day when I was on the debate team, it was a bunch of straight edges. Yes, already sound of privilege, exactly. And so all of those things might actually truly be the cause of the graduation gap. It's possible that it's not debate at all. And I think this is a great example of like, we did not randomly assign people to participate in debate. These are people who like went out of their way to be like, I want to, during my summer, attend a lecture by like random alumni who are going to tell me about causal inference. Like, you are not a random sample. Last one. I should have ended with the debate one. That was the most fun. think this is also the hardest one in my opinion, but
That's a weird tag for this.
say that again, Jesse.
Wait, I don't know. That's a little bit of a weird tag for this because, like,
I wanted to overstate like the claim.
okay, yeah.
So I suppose like they're claiming like, here's what the study says. The study says that like people who vape think vaping is less dangerous. Now I'm claiming that I suppose maybe this is also on me. Maybe I wrote this claim like too strangely. Like I'm sort of claiming that these are people who think that vaping isn't that dangerous, and so they do it. But could there be another relationship here? Yeah. I don't need to raise your hand.
Probably that the people inside listening could have start off as smoking cigarettes and their body had a much more healthy reaction compared to vaping. Therefore, this is safer than cigarettes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, right? If you were already smoking, if you have experience, you might be more likely to vape. You might have chosen to vape because you think it's less dangerous. I think I see people, they could be trying to quit cigarettes. I think that's right. Peer pressure. I think so on the peer pressure, like I think that's a good example. Like there's something else that might cause you to smoke or to vape. Certainly there are other causal factors. I would push on the peer pressure, make the argument for why peer pressure affects both of these things. And I think it could, like if people who experience more peer pressure maybe are both more likely to vape and more likely to like think it's safe because everybody's doing it. What we had kind of in mind is that once you start vaping, you come to believe it's safe. Like you might vape for reasons other than safety, but then once it becomes part of your life, you would tell a survey person, oh, I think it's less dangerous than cigarettes. And I think this is kind of to just generally note that oftentimes surveys will ask you what your opinions are about it or what your actions are about a whole bunch of things in the present, right? They'll ask you like, what do you currently think about this? And what do you currently think about that? And what do you currently do? It doesn't necessarily follow that like your beliefs about something are the reason that you're doing something. It could be the other way around. Like the fact, like for example, I think if you survey a bunch of people and find that like debaters are more likely to think debate is easy, like yes, there's probably some effect of people who think debate is easy join debate. But there's also going to be another effect where once you've done debate for a while, you'll start thinking it's easy. And so anyway, that's like my overarching message is you should be spending time thinking about kind of the relationships of these arguments, and when you get to know a topic, you'll get to know like what the common cards are or what the common arguments are about the relationships between like whatever the X is and whatever the Y is for your particular debate topic. And if you spend some more time thinking about like, why might the common evidence on this be actually pretty bad? How can I explain it in a debate round? I think you will have a lot of success. And so I always keep in mind the time I was like subtweeted on the Chessa Twitter, where they're arguing that I'm not using the time between rounds responsibly. This is me and my debate partner at the time, back in like 2015. So that's the question I'll pose to you. Are you using the time between rounds responsibly? Anyway, that's my presentation. Any questions, I suppose? Okay, I'm just gonna like hope that means that Jesse and I did a stellar job and there are no questions, but there is another explanation, which is that we did such a poor job that nobody has any questions because they didn't understand anything. Yes, I will post the slideshow to the Google Classroom. Well, I mean, okay. If you like this, I'm talking again on Monday about healthcare policy.